From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. It's Wednesday, October 22nd, and here are today's headlines. The cost of a University of Vermont education will increase next year. In-state tuition will go up 2% to nearly $17,000. Out-of-state tuition will increase 4.5% to more than $46,000. And those rates do not include room and board. The UVM Board of Trustees approved the tuition hikes Friday. It was their first meeting with the university's new president, Marlene Tromp. On Vermont Edition Tuesday, she said UVM has been hit hard by inflation.
We need to cover those inflationary costs, and that's very difficult to do in an environment where you hold tuition flat because our costs are not stable.
Tromp noted the university is in the midst of strategic planning, and she wants part of that effort to focus on raising philanthropic dollars for endowed scholarships. The Public Utility Commission has opened an investigation into the financial solvency of the Hyde Park Electric Department. Ricky French is chair of the Hyde Park Village Trustees. The group runs the utility that serves about 1,400 homes in Lamoille County.
We recently figured out that there were some financial issues, and we're working very cooperatively with the department to try to figure out what our next steps are.
State regulators say Hyde Park has been improperly using other funding sources to pay for its operations. They say the utility also has an aging transformer that it cannot afford to upgrade. Vermont's Department of Motor Vehicles will shut down for several days early next month for major computer upgrades. Between November 7th and November 10th, all DMV offices statewide, plus the call center, will be closed to the public. People who need vehicle registration or title transactions only can book appointments on November 5th and 6th before the offices close, but limited slots remain. The call center and all statewide offices will reopen on November 12th after Veterans Day. The DMV states in a press release it is replacing the 50-year-old computer systems with a goal to streamline current services and keep up with demand. Coming up, attention was drawn to Vermont for all the wrong reasons when it was revealed that a sitting state senator took part in a text group chat featuring racist and anti-Semitic messages, a revelation that eventually led him to say he'll resign. We'll find out why the chair of the state GOP did not think Samuel Douglas should step down after this. Sam Douglas has indicated he will no longer be a Vermont state senator. The Republican from Troy said in a written statement sent to media outlets that he would resign after Politico published leaked messages from a racist, misogynist, and anti-Semitic group chat of young Republicans. As of late Tuesday afternoon, WCAX reported Douglas had yet to formally resign and was still technically employed by the state. But there were also no reports that Douglas had changed his mind about resigning from the job. Both Douglas and his wife participated in the widely decried group chat. And after the Politico story came out, Vermont leaders on both sides of the aisle demanded Douglas step down. One notable exception was the chair of the Vermont GOP, Paul Dame, who did not agree that Douglas should voluntarily vacate the seat. Dame discussed his position in an interview this week with Vermont Edition's Michaela Lafrac.
Paul, you issued a statement after the Politico story broke in which you criticized Sam Douglas's participation in this chat, but you didn't call for him to resign. And you said his remarks were not specifically bigoted or racist, though the chat was. That statement was later redacted by the party's executive committee. Do you still stand by your initial statement, or did you make a mistake?
Well, I think as the whole thing was unfolding, everyone made the comment that they felt they could support with the information they had at the time. And I think the important thing is, Sam saw that there wasn't a lot of support for him, that he was, and for what was good for his constituents, he decided to step down. He is committed, as the rest of our Vermont Republicans are, to the issues that he was working for and that we've been working for in the state Senate. And he didn't want to get in the way of moving forward on affordability, better housing options, and public safety. And he felt like it was going to be hard for him to be effective moving forward. And that's part of the reason that he resigned. And we're going to be starting the process this week of talking to people in Orleans County to find a replacement. Luckily, we've got a couple months here before a legislator would have to be sort of ready to jump in the fray. And I think there's a lot of good options for Republicans in that area, including some current and potential former legislators or somebody new. So I think there's a lot to be looking forward to.
Governor Scott pretty immediately called on Douglas to resign. Scott had endorsed Douglas's run for the state Senate in 2024. And at a press conference last week, Governor Scott said, I'm quoting here, "We should reject any of what we saw in that article. We should reject it out of hand. No tolerance, zero tolerance for that. We're better than that." By not calling on Douglas to resign, Paul, I'm wondering if you feel like you have different views than the governor. Do you see yourself as tolerating a different level of political rhetoric than he does?
That's a good question, and I thought a lot about this question earlier this year. Our congressional representative Becca Balint made a statement. If we don't change immigration policy, we're not going to have anyone here to wipe our behinds. But she used the other word, and I took a strong position on that. I said that was coarse and vulgar language, and I called on her to apologize. I didn't think at that time that poor choice of words merited resignation, and so I didn't call for Becca Balint's resignation at that time. Although I certainly had plenty of Republicans who were encouraging me to do that. And so I think that part of what I've been trying to do in my term as chair is try to find what is a standard that we can hold all of our elected officials to, and how do we begin to apply that equally in a nonpartisan way. I think maybe it makes me look back at some of the other examples of we've had Aston County State's Attorney Eva Vekos showed up at a DUI crime scene drunk. And she's still a prosecutor. Democrats didn't call on her to resign. So I think up to this point, I hadn't had that as the standard. Sometimes when the opposing party calls for resignation, it can feel a little politically cheap, and so I think there's going to be a reevaluation of what's the standard for all of our political officers and political representatives, and how do we hold that standard consistent.
Now, I just want to be clear here. Are you saying that Representative Becca Balint's statement about not having people around to wipe our butts, that's an equivalent statement to what was going on in this chat, which included racist terms, compared people to Nazis, misogynistic statements about rape?
So I'm not making any comparison. I'm saying
okay. It sounded I'm
saying that what is the standard that we hold our elected officials to in terms of what they said, not necessarily what's said with the people around them. And I think in Balint's case, it was very clear what she said, what she meant, and an apology was given and was found as an acceptable. And I think there's certainly a case to be made that that's a xenophobic comment. It's a comment against immigrants, that immigrants have a certain place. And
do you think an apology by Sam Douglas would have been an appropriate response for this? Like, do you think he should have resigned?
And I believe in his statement he did apologize for the things that were said, even though he is claiming that he wasn't aware of those things being said at the time, and he read some of those things for the first time in the Political article.
I do think it's relevant to note here that that Sam Douglas, who we did reach out to before this show, works as a mental health professional in Lamoille County, focused much of his work in the State House on substance abuse recovery. And in his resignation letter, he wrote that he's received some pretty hateful messages since the story broke, including threats to his newborn baby's life. He cited an online petition to have his child taken away from him. Thinking about that, I was reminded of an email that we got from a listener, Amy in Saxons River, who writes, "I'm cringing at the remarks made by young Republicans in the text chat reported by Politico. I recently attended the Vermont League of Cities and Towns town fair, and the keynote address was about keeping civility in our political discourse. The theme of the presentation was a recognition that we have big problems to solve in this country, and we're not going to solve them by insulting each other and making everything into a polarized question." So my question for you is, Paul, what role do you see, recognizing that there are many people who have roles in this, but what role do you see the Vermont GOP specifically having in promoting civil discourse and denouncing harmful rhetoric, especially at a time when we see some of that harmful rhetoric being shared by our president?
Yeah, and that's a really important question. I hope that's kind of how we elevate this conversation moving forward. I know I had reached out to Vermont Public after Charlie Kirk had been assassinated and saying, look, I don't know what I can do, but I want to be part of a process that elevates the conversation that everyone is having. And part of what I've tried to do as state chair is be judicious in not exaggerating claims about things that Democrats have done or said, to try to keep that within a reasonable, I don't want to get into an arms race where somebody said this about my guy, so I got to say something bad about that. That's just a path to misery for the voters, and I don't want to go down there. And so I'm certainly open to hearing what listeners have to say. I want to participate in bigger conversations like that.
That was Vermont GOP Chair Paul Dame on Vermont Edition. You can find the full interview on Vermont Edition's podcast feed or at vermontpublic.org. And before we end today's episode, we have an update regarding the vacancy expected to be left by Douglas's pending resignation. A U.S. Army veteran and community leader has announced his candidacy for that state Senate seat in Orleans County. In a statement Monday, Democrat Gaston Bathalon of Troy expressed his intention to win the seat. Governor Phil Scott will appoint a new person to represent Orleans County in the coming weeks once Douglas formally steps down. And that's the seat Bathalon says he'll attempt to win in the elections of November 2026. Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Michaela Lafrac, Howard Weiss-Tisman, Mary Engish, and Jen Jarecki. Today's episode was edited by Stephanie Colombini, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. Talk to you tomorrow.